The call came at 6:47 in the morning, and Maren knew before she even answered it that her life was about to split in two. She'd been at her desk in the accounting room of Halford Distribution, the small, fluorescent-lit box she'd claimed as her own 3 years ago, when the company still had 42 employees and a working coffee machine. Now there were 11 employees, no coffee machine, and a folder on her screen that she'd spent the last 4 nights trying to make add up to something other than what it was. It was her mother on the phone. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence on the other end before her mother spoke. Her mother never paused. Her mother had been filling silence since Maren was 6 years old, had treated quiet like a personal insult. "The bank called your uncle," her mother said finally. "Maren, they're going to take the house." She didn't say our house, she said the house, as if by making it impersonal it might hurt less. It didn't. Maren set down her pen. Outside the narrow window above her desk, Toronto was just beginning to lighten, that flat, grey February light that never fully committed to being day. She looked at the folder on her screen. She looked at her own hands. She thought about the number she'd been staring at since Tuesday. $112,000. The difference between what Halford owed and what it had. The gap her boss, Derek Halford, had smiled at her across last week and said, "You're good with numbers, Maren. Figure it out." She hadn't figured it out, and now her mother's house, the house where Maren had grown up, where her grandmother's handwriting was still penciled on the doorframe measuring the heights of grandchildren, was going to be repossessed because her uncle had co-signed a loan for a man Maren had spent 2 years trying not to think about. Dex Whitmore, her ex-fiancé, who had, 7 months ago, stood in her mother's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, smiled at her uncle across the table and said the investment opportunity was solid, was secure, was basically guaranteed. Who had, 4 months after that, stopped returning calls. Who had, 3 months after that, been photographed in Cancun with a woman Maren recognized from his gym. She'd found out about the Cancun photo the same way she'd found out about everything else in the last year. Alone at a desk, at an unreasonable hour with a screen as her only company. "How much?" Maren said. Her mother told her. Maren wrote it down. She wrote it down because that was what she did. She put numbers on paper, she made them visible, she faced them. $94,000. On top of everything else. On top of her own rent that was already 2 months behind. On top of the job that was dissolving around her like wet paper. She told her mother she'd figure it out. She said it the same way Derek Halford had said it to her, and she hated herself a little for that. She hung up and sat in the grey light for a long time. The Halford building was in the West End, near the rail yards, in a part of the city that the real estate listings had started calling up and coming about 6 years ago and hadn't stopped calling it since. The neighborhood around it had changed. New condos, a ramen place, a boutique gym with floor-to-ceiling windows where people could be seen suffering on treadmills at all hours. But the Halford building itself had stayed the same. Low, brown brick, loading bays that hadn't loaded anything in months, a parking lot where half the spaces were empty now that half the staff was gone. Maren had been there since 7:30. She was usually first in. By 9, Derek arrived. He had the look of a man who'd slept fine, which meant either he didn't know how bad it was, or he'd decided not to care. Maren had long suspected it was the latter. Derek had a gift, a genuine, almost architectural gift, for not caring about the right things. He poured coffee from a machine he'd had installed in his office specifically because the common room one had died. He didn't offer her any. "I need to talk to you about the Meridian accounts," Maren said. "Good morning to you too, Derek. The Meridian accounts are being moved. Someone has been drawing on them through a subsidiary that doesn't appear in any of our filing. I've traced it back 6 months, and the total is—" "I know about Meridian," he said. She stopped. He was looking at his coffee, not at her. "You know," she said, "it's being handled." "It's not being handled. It's $112,000 missing from accounts that I am legally responsible for reconciling. If the CRA audits us, which they will, Derek, because I'm not the only one who can read a balance sheet, that comes back on me. That comes back on my license." He looked up then. and she saw it. The particular flatness in his eyes that she'd learned over 3 years meant he'd already made a decision and was just waiting for the conversation to catch up. "You've been a great employee," he said. "I want you to know that." She drove home in a kind of controlled static. Termination, effective immediately, 2 weeks severance, a non-disclosure that his lawyer had apparently already drafted. The non-disclosure was the part that made her understand, fully and finally, that she'd been sitting inside a crime without knowing it. That the numbers she'd spent months trying to reconcile had been designed not to reconcile. That the gap wasn't a mistake, it was a plan, and she had been the one holding the pen. She sat in her car outside her building and did not go inside. She sat there for a long time watching the street. A woman walking a dog, a child on a scooter despite the cold, everything ordinary and unreachable feeling, like looking at photographs of a life she used to have. $94,000, $112,000, her certification, her record, her name. She was 31 years old, she had $42 in her checking account, a lease that was overdue, and a non-disclosure agreement in her bag that she had not signed. It was her neighbor, Bet, 60-something, retired Crown attorney, sharp as a winter morning, who mentioned the name. Maren hadn't meant to tell her. She'd run into Betty in the elevator, and Betty had one look at her face and said, "Kitchen." Now. Bet made tea the way she did everything, efficiently and without asking what you wanted. She set the mug down in front of Maren and waited. Maren told her about Harford, about the accounts, about the NDA. Bet listened without interrupting, which was the most valuable thing anyone had done for her in months. "Don't sign it," Betty said when she was done. "If I don't sign it, he'll what? Expose you for discovering his fraud?" Maren. Betty's voice was not unkind, but it had edges. "You're a forensic accountant who uncovered an internal theft scheme and got fired for it. That is not the position of a woman who should be signing documents that protect the man who fired her. I need the 2 weeks. You need more than 2 weeks." Bet wrapped both hands around her own mug. "Do you know who Croft is?" The name meant nothing to her. She shook her head. "Lachlan Croft," Betty said. "He operates various things. Legitimate businesses, mostly. Construction, logistics, private security, and some things that are considerably less legitimate, which most people in this city know about and nobody says out loud." She paused. "He also operates, as far as I understand it, as a kind of unofficial arbitration system for people who've been defrauded and have no legal recourse. People who can't go to the police because the police won't help them, or because going to the police would expose them to something worse." Maren looked at her. "You're describing a crime lord." "I'm describing someone who solves certain kinds of problems," Betty said with the precision of a woman who had spent a career choosing words carefully. "I'm not telling you to go to him. I'm telling you he exists. What you do with that information is your decision." Maren drank her tea. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway. "How would someone even?" "I still have a number," Betty said, "from a long time ago, from a situation that it is not necessary for you to know about." She stood, went to the drawer beside the sink, and came back with a card. Plain white, a phone number, no name. Maren looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. She called from a payphone. There were not many payphones left in Toronto. She'd found one outside a laundromat on Dundas, the kind that still had a working handset, because someone maintained it for reasons she didn't understand and was grateful for. A woman answered, not young. Her voice had the particular composure of someone who had been receiving unusual calls for a very long time. Maren said she was referred by someone who preferred not to be named. She said she had an accounting situation that involved fraud, an NDA, and a number she could document precisely. The woman told her to be at an address in Corktown at 8 o'clock the following evening. She gave the address once, did not repeat it, and disconnected. Maren wrote it down. She went home and spent the rest of the afternoon cross-referencing every transaction she could reconstruct from memory, printing what she still had access to before her credentials were revoked at 5 p.m. and building the clearest, most precise record she was capable of building. She was good at that. Whatever else was falling apart, she was good at that. The building in Corktown looked like a renovated warehouse, which it was she discovered the later. A former textile factory that had been converted into offices for a holding company that did not advertise itself. The front entrance was unmarked except for a small brass number. 2 men stood near the door, neither of them in uniforms, both of them with the kind of stillness that came from being very certain of their position in any given situation. They looked at her. She looked back. One of them opened the door. Inside was not what she'd expected, though she had not known what to expect exactly. A reception desk, neutral tones, the kind of space that said money through the very restraint of it, through the absence of anything unnecessary. A woman behind the desk with dark hair and reading glasses directed her down a hallway without being asked why she was there. The office at the end of it was large, not ostentatiously. There was nothing ostentatious about it. A desk, clean and uncluttered, bookshelves, actual books, a window that looked out over the rail corridor, the same rail corridor she could see from her own office in the West End, though from a different angle, at a different height. The man behind the desk did not stand when she entered. She found herself cataloguing details the way she did with spread automatically, because it was how her mind worked, probably early 40s. Dark hair with grey at the temples, a scar that began below his left ear and disappeared into his collar. Not quite handsome, but the kind of face that demanded attention through some quality she couldn't immediately name. Not beauty, not warmth, something more like weight. The sense that this face had been somewhere, had seen things, and had decided what it thought about them. He was looking at the folder she'd sent ahead. He did not look up for a long time. When he did, he said, "Not a question." "Yes," she said. "Sit down." She sat. She did not thank him for the permission. Something shifted in his expression, almost nothing, just a fractional adjustment. But she caught it. She was good at catching small things. "Harford distribution," he said. He had a slight accent she couldn't place. Not quite anything, the smoothed-down residue of somewhere else. "You worked there 3 years. 3 years and 4 months. You identified a systematic misappropriation through a subsidiary account. You confronted your employer. You were terminated and offered a non-disclosure, which I didn't sign." He looked at her then, really looked, for the first time since she'd sat down. "Why not? Because signing it would have been an admission that I had something to hide. I don't." He considered that. "Most people sign, I'm aware." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the building, she could hear low voices, a door, the structural sounds of a place that was working even at this hour. "What do you want?" he said. "I want the money back." The 112 that Harford moved. "I want documentation that I wasn't complicit in moving it. And I want it done in a way that doesn't put me in a room with the CRA explaining why I spent 4 months signing off on accounts that were being drained. That's a specific list. I'm a specific person." He leaned back in his chair slightly. Not relaxed. She had the sense that Croft was never fully relaxed, that even this small adjustment was a controlled choice. And in exchange? She'd prepared for this. She'd spent the previous night preparing for exactly this. "I've looked at 14 months of Harford's books, not just the Meridian accounts, all of it. I can give you a complete picture of the money flows, the subsidiary structure, and what I believe the intended destination of the funds was." She paused. "I think Derek Harford is moving money for someone else, someone further up. I don't know who, but I know what the accounting looks like when someone is doing it, and that's what this looks like." Croft was very still. "You have documentation," he said. It was not a question either. He had read the folder she'd sent. He already knew. "I have what I could reconstruct before my access was revoked. It's enough to start with." "And you came to me," he said, because the police would take 6 months to understand the structure and another 6 to do anything about it. Because I don't have 6 months. Because Bette said you solve certain kinds of problems." She met his eyes. He had dark eyes, and they gave nothing back. "And because the person who is probably moving money through Harford is the kind of person who, if I went to the police, would know about it before the week was out." He didn't confirm or deny that. He picked up the top page of her folder and looked at it again. set it down. "There's something else," he said. She hadn't told him about her mother. She hadn't included it in anything she sent. "How? Your name ran before you arrived," he said without apology. "Standard procedure. Dex Whitmore is in your file." She felt the particular cold that came with realizing the edges of what you knew. "He's not connected to Halford." "No." A pause. "He's connected to other things." He didn't elaborate. "The debt on the house in Scarborough. Your uncle's name is on the note." "Yes. That's separate from what you're asking me." "I know that." She kept her voice flat. She had learned a long time ago that the moment you let desperation into your voice, you lost. "I'm not asking you to fix my personal problems. I'm asking you to help me fix an accounting crime that I am technically implicated in. Everything else is my problem." He was quiet again. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, that was full of something, some calculation she couldn't see. "6 weeks, he said finally. She blinked. "I'm sorry. You work for me. 6 weeks. Legitimate operations only. Those will be made available to you. And you tell me what you find, what inefficiencies, what exposures, what I should be concerned about from a regulatory perspective." He set the folder flat on the desk. "In exchange, the Halford situation is handled. Your name is clean. The documentation is filed appropriately." She stared at him. "That's... You want me to audit you? I want a qualified accountant to look at certain holdings that have not had independent review in some time." "Yes, and the Whitmore debt." A fraction of silence. "The Whitmore situation is a separate accounting matter. If it becomes relevant in the course of your work, it will be handled at that time." She understood immediately what he was not saying, that he knew exactly how much that debt mattered to her, that he was choosing not to offer it directly, that would make her beholden, and that he was instead leaving it in a category called potentially relevant, where it would not compromise either of them. It was, she thought, a very precise way to offer someone something without offering it. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. She said, "I want everything in writing." Something crossed his face then. Brief, complicated, almost, she thought, like the beginning of a smile that had decided not to commit. "So do I," he said. She started the following Monday. The offices he gave her access to were in the same building, on the 3rd floor, in a room that had real light. South-facing windows that picked up the late winter sun and threw long rectangles across the floor by 10 o'clock. It was the nicest workspace she'd ever had, and she tried not to think about what that said about the last decade of her life. The books were meticulous. That was the first thing she noticed. Whatever else Croft was, his financial records were kept with a precision that most legitimate companies she'd worked with couldn't match. Clear categorization, consistent methodology, no gaps in documentation. It was either the work of someone who had nothing to hide or someone who understood exactly what hiding required. She couldn't tell which yet. That was the point of being here. She found his CFO, a man named Pierce, watching her on the 2nd day with the particular wariness of someone whose territory was being reviewed. She acknowledged him, asked him 3 direct questions about the filing system, and didn't ask him anything that would put him on the defensive. By the end of the week, he was leaving coffee on her desk without being asked. She didn't comment on it. She drank it. Croft himself, she saw infrequently. He moved through the building with the economy of someone who did not waste motion. She would see him in a hallway, in conference rooms through glass walls, once in the lobby at 6 in the morning when she'd arrived early and he'd apparently never left. He acknowledged her with a nod. She acknowledged him back. Their conversations, when they happened, were brief and entirely professional. She had expected to find it difficult, working inside something she didn't fully understand, for a man whose other operations she'd been instructed not to look at, on a timeline that had been dictated to her rather than negotiated. She had expected to feel watched or compromised or afraid. She didn't feel any of those things. She felt, and this was the part she thought about at night, in the small apartment where the heat still clanked unevenly and her mother called every Tuesday. She felt accurate, like she was doing precisely what she was built to do. Like the numbers in front of her had weight and honesty, even inside a building that operated in the grey. She told herself that was the accountant in her, that it meant nothing more than that. She was not sure she believed herself. On the third week, she found the irregularity. It wasn't in anything she'd been asked to look at. It was in a payroll subsidiary. Not illegal, not even unusual on the surface. But the patterning was wrong. She'd seen patterning like it before. Small amounts, different accounts, regular intervals, designed to stay below reporting thresholds. Someone was skimming. Not Croft. The access trail made that clear. But someone inside one of his holding structures, someone who understood the architecture well enough to know where the blind spots were. She pulled the thread for 2 days before she brought it to him. She went to his office at 4:30 on a Wednesday. He was on a call, but he ended it when she knocked, which she noted. He was the kind of man who decided what mattered in real time. She put the printout on his desk. She explained what she'd found. She walked him through the patterning, the account structure, the estimated total, 38,000 over 9 months, which was significant enough to matter and small enough to have stayed invisible. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, both precise. Then he looked at her. How long would it have taken a standard audit to find this, he said, assuming they were looking at everything equally? A year, maybe more. Assuming someone was trying to find it specifically. She thought about it honestly. 3, 4 weeks. If they were good, you found it in 3. I was looking for exposures, she said. This is an exposure. Another pause. That particular weight of his silences. She'd learned them in 3 weeks, their different textures. This one was the silence of someone recalibrating. The Whitmore account, he said. She went still. The debt on the Scarborough property. It's been acquired. She stared at him. What does that mean? It means the note is no longer held by the original lender. The terms are under review. He looked at the printout rather than at her. Nothing is resolved. I want to be clear about that, but it is being looked at. She understood. She was beginning to understand how he operated, the specific vocabulary of being looked at and under review and relevant at that time. The way he moved things without saying he was moving them, the way he built obligation and settled it without anyone having to say out loud what was happening. She should have found it unsettling. She found it, instead, almost restful. There was a logic to it. A ledger, like he'd said in the beginning, debits and credits. Things owed, things settled. Thank you, she said. He looked up. Don't. She didn't ask what he meant. She understood. On the last day of the 6th week, she put a folder on his desk. Every holding she'd reviewed, every discrepancy she'd found and resolved, the payroll situation with a complete documentation trail and a 2-page summary in plain language of what she recommended and why. She'd worked until 2 in the morning finishing it. He picked it up. He looked at it the way he'd looked at her first folder 7 weeks ago, with complete attention, as if the rest of the world had agreed to wait. Harford, she said, filed with the relevant parties last week. The subsidiary documentation has been registered. Your name appears as the discoverer of the irregularity, not a participant in it. He paused. You may receive a call from the CRA in the coming weeks. It will be a formality. She exhaled slowly. The kind of exhale that carries more than air. And the license review will not proceed. She nodded, looked at the window. The light outside had gone to that particular late afternoon gold that Toronto got in early spring, when the cold was still there but something beneath it was shifting. What happens now, she said. That depends on you. She turned to look at him. He was watching her, openly, for once, without the controlled neutrality. She wasn't sure she'd seen him look at anyone like that, like he'd decided to stop being careful for one moment and see what happened. The payroll situation, he said. The broader restructuring you've outlined in the summary. It will need to be implemented, and there are 2 other holdings I haven't shown you that may have similar exposures. You want to extend the arrangement, she said. I want to hire you, he said, permanently, with a title, a salary, and a scope that will take a very long time to get through. A pause. You would report to me directly. She looked at the folder in his hands. She thought about the small accounting room in the West End, the fluorescent light, the folder on her screen that had never added up. She thought about Derek Harford's eyes going flat before he fired her. She thought about $42 in a checking account and a pen on Dundas and a white card with no name. She thought about the note on her grandmother's doorframe, the pencil marks, the names, the years. And the Whitmore debt, she said. Cleared, he said, quietly, 2 days ago. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought, I don't know what this building actually is. I don't know what half of what happens here means. I don't know this man. And then she thought, I know his books. I know what he values and what he protects and what he considers non-negotiable and where he leaves room for error and where he doesn't. I know more about him than I know about most people I've spent years around. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't always tell the whole truth, but they didn't lie, and his numbers told her something she trusted more than she expected. I want a dental plan, she said. He blinked. It was the first time she'd seen him look anything close to surprised. And parking, she added. My commute is unreasonable. The thing that had been almost a smile before, it happened now. Brief, controlled, real. Have Pierce update the benefits schedule, he said. She nodded once, picked up her bag, paused at the door. Croft, she said. He looked up. The payroll skimming, the person who set it up, they accessed the system through a shared login registered to your CFO. She watched him understand what she was telling him. Pierce didn't do it, she added. The login was compromised, but he should know. A pause. I know, Croft said. She understood. He had known. He'd been waiting to see if she would find it, would bring it to him straight, without softening it or politicizing it or using it. She had. She nodded again and walked out into the hallway. The building hummed around her, the same low hum it always had, that sound of machinery and purpose and things being quietly decided. She did not feel afraid of it. She hadn't, she realized, for a few weeks now. She wasn't sure exactly when it had changed. Somewhere between the second folder and the third week, and a cup of coffee left on her desk by a man who'd been watching her work. The city outside the windows was bright and cold and entirely itself. She took the stairs.